The war had ended, but rule had not yet returned. With the Iron Throne occupied by a child too young to govern, authority fractured almost immediately. Lords who had survived the dance gathered in King's Landing not to celebrate peace, but to prevent collapse. The realm was exhausted, its treasury bled dry, its armies shattered, and its great houses deeply divided by memory and blame. In this vacuum, power did not flow naturally to the crown. It was seized, negotiated, and constrained. A regency council was formally proclaimed to rule in the king's name, not as a temporary courtesy, but as a necessity born of fear. Each regent understood the danger. The last time ambition went unchecked, dragons burned the realm. This council was meant to restrain chaos, yet from its first hour it was shaped by distrust, secrecy, and competing visions of control. The regency had begun, not as a promise of stability, but as a fragile truce among survivors. With the regency proclaimed, the next step was decisive and dangerous, choosing who would rule in the king's name. Survivors of the dance converged on the Red Keep carrying grievances, ambitions, and memories of betrayal. The council that emerged was not born of unity, but of exhaustion. Each appointment was a compromise meant to prevent renewed bloodshed. Former enemies sat at the same table, bound not by trust, but by the shared understanding that the realm could not endure another war. Authority was divided deliberately. No single voice would be allowed to dominate, and no regent was granted unchecked power. This structure was designed as a restraint, yet it also ensured paralysis. Decisions would be slow, disputes inevitable. From its first meeting, the Regency Council reflected the scars of the dance. Men chosen not because they were loved, but because removing them might fracture the peace. Governance resumed, but stability remained uncertain. The transfer of power did not come with ceremony or celebration. It unfolded quietly through sealed decrees and controlled movements within the Red Keep. The crown remained upon the king's head, but authority passed elsewhere. Decisions that once flowed from the throne were formally redirected to the regents, whose signatures now carried the force of law. This was not abdication, but suspension. The monarchy endured in symbol, while governance shifted in practice. Guards tightened their watch. Messengers waited for council approval rather than royal command, and officials learned quickly where real power now rested. Every act was deliberate, designed to prevent rivals from claiming influence through proximity to the king. By placing rule in collective hands, the realm sought safety in structure. Yet this transfer also created distance between crown and subjects, between king and kingdom. The regents ruled in his name, but not by his will. From this moment, the Iron Throne commanded respect, while the regency commanded obedience. Peace demanded a price, and the regents chose fear as its currency. Though the war had ended, men who had sworn loyalty to the Greens still lived, some imprisoned, others quietly protected by old alliances. The Regency Council moved swiftly to erase these lingering threats. Trials were brief, evidence often secondary to necessity. What mattered was certainty. Each execution was meant to send a message: the civil war was finished, and resistance would not be tolerated. These deaths were not acts of vengeance carried out in rage, but calculated decisions shaped by insecurity. The regents believed mercy would invite rebellion, and delay would embolden conspirators. Scaffolds rose within sight of the Red Keep, guarded heavily, watched in silence. No cheers followed. The city observed, subdued and wary. With each sentence carried out, the council tightened its hold on the realm, trading reconciliation for control. Stability was enforced not through unity, but through elimination of those who remembered a different king. The final act of the Regency's opening phase was not carried out with swords, but with words. An official proclamation was drafted, sealed, and announced throughout King's Landing and beyond. The Civil War was declared finished. The Dance of the Dragons, which had shattered the realm and extinguished its dragons, was now ended by law. The wording was deliberate. No victors were named, no causes revisited. The proclamation spoke only of unity, obedience, and silence. By fixing the war's end in ink, the regents sought to control its memory as much as its consequences. Messengers carried copies to the great houses, while heralds read the decree aloud in courts and keeps. This act did not heal wounds, but it closed the argument. From this moment forward, resistance could no longer claim the chaos of war as excuse. Rebellion would now be treason. The Regency had drawn a line across history and commanded the realm to step beyond it. With the war formally declared over, the regents confronted a danger that peace itself could not dissolve, armies that no longer had a purpose. Thousands of men remained under arms across the realm, loyal not to the crown, but to commanders shaped by civil war. These forces threatened order simply by existing. The Regency Council acted decisively. Commands were issued to disband host levies, dismiss sellswords, and return banners to their lords. Payments were arranged where possible, force was threatened where necessary. Camps were broken, supply lines cut, and marching columns ordered home. The regents understood the risk. Idle soldiers bred rebellion, and unpaid ones bred banditry. Disbandment was not mercy, but containment. By dissolving wartime armies, the council sought to reclaim the monopoly of violence for the crown. Peace would not be maintained by swords in the field, but by their removal. The realm would be quiet again, even if resentment followed the soldiers home. With armies dismissed and open resistance crushed, the Regency turned to punishment that would endure beyond the battlefield. Lands belonging to proven rebels were seized by decree. Castles that had flown opposing banners were stripped of their lords, their revenues redirected to the crown. This was not carried out as mass vengeance, but as calculated reordering. The regents believed that rebellion had been sustained not only by men, but by wealth and territory. By confiscating lands, they removed the foundations of future defiance. Royal officials were dispatched across the realm to inventory estates, seal treasuries, and replace household authority. Some properties were held directly by the crown. Others were reassigned to loyalists whose obedience had survived the war. The process was orderly, legal, and relentless. For those dispossessed, the loss was absolute. Titles meant little without land to sustain them. Through confiscation, the Regency reshaped the political landscape, rewarding loyalty, erasing defiance, and binding the peace to property rather than promises. After punishment came calculation. The Regency understood that ruling solely through fear would fracture the realm as surely as mercy without consequence. While major rebels lost lands and titles, lesser houses, those whose support had been hesitant, coerced, or symbolic, were offered pardon. These decisions were not acts of forgiveness, but instruments of control. Each pardon was conditional, bound by renewed oaths, financial penalties, and the permanent memory of royal scrutiny. The council reviewed petitions carefully, weighing the cost of dispossession against the value of stability. By sparing minor houses, the regents preserved local governance, avoided uprisings born of desperation, and signaled that submission still had value. Lords knelt not in triumph, but in relief. Their survival depended on obedience, not loyalty. Through selective mercy, the Regency reassembled the political fabric of Westeros, thread by thread, ensuring that peace rested not on reconciliation, but on dependence upon the crown's judgment. With the realm disarmed and resistance broken, the Regency turned toward judgment. The violence of the dance had not ended with the war's conclusion. Its consequences lingered in burned villages, unlawful killings, and acts carried out beyond royal command. To address this legacy, the Regency Council authorized formal war crimes trials. These proceedings were not held to seek reconciliation, but to reassert the rule of law after years of chaos. Accused men were brought from prisons and holds across the capital, charged with atrocities committed under the cover of war. The trials were public, deliberate, and tightly controlled. Evidence was presented, witnesses heard, sentences recorded. Some defendants were spared, others condemned, but all were made examples. The regents understood the message such trials conveyed. War no longer excused cruelty. Justice, as defined by the crown, had returned. By placing violence on trial, the regency sought to separate lawful rule from the lawlessness that had nearly destroyed the realm. With the realm disarmed and resistance broken, the regency turned toward judgment. The violence of the dance had not ended with the war's conclusion. Its consequences lingered in burned villages, unlawful killings, and acts carried out beyond royal command. To address this legacy, the Regency Council authorized formal war crimes trials. These proceedings were not held to seek reconciliation, but to reassert the rule of law after years of chaos. Accused men were brought from prisons and holds across the capital, charged with atrocities committed under the cover of war. The trials were public, deliberate, and tightly controlled. Evidence was presented, witnesses heard, sentences recorded. Some defendants were spared, others condemned, but all were made examples. The regents understood the message such trials conveyed. War no longer excused cruelty. Justice, as defined by the crown, had returned. By placing violence on trial, the regency sought to separate lawful rule from the lawlessness that had nearly destroyed the realm. The City Watch had survived the war, but its loyalty had not. During the dance, gold cloaks had been bribed, divided, and used as tools by rival powers within King's Landing. Some commanders had grown wealthy from chaos. Others had chosen sides when neutrality was demanded. The Regency judged this unacceptable. Reform began with removal. Senior officers were dismissed, arrested, or quietly replaced. Units were broken apart and reassigned to prevent old loyalties from surviving intact. Pay was standardized, oversight imposed, and reporting lines redirected away from personal patrons and toward the council itself. Discipline replaced favoritism. The Watch was reshaped not as a political force, but as an instrument of order. These measures were deliberate and unsentimental. The regents understood that a capital could fall without an invading army if its guardians served themselves. By purging the City Watch, the Regency secured the streets of King's Landing and ensured that force within the city answered only to the state. The war had emptied the realm's coffers, but no one knew how completely. Years of emergency levies, secret payments, and unauthorized withdrawals had turned the royal treasury into a mystery even to those who claimed to manage it. Recognizing that authority could not function without financial clarity, the Regency ordered a full audit of the Crown's accounts. This was an act of exposure as much as governance. Ledgers were seized, vaults unsealed, and officials summoned to account for every coin spent in the king's name. Discrepancies surfaced quickly, missing revenues, inflated expenses, and payments authorized without record. Some losses were attributed to chaos, others pointed to corruption. The audit was relentless, methodical, and deeply unpopular among those who had benefited from confusion. Yet the regents persisted. Without restoring fiscal control, no reform could endure. By auditing the treasury, the Regency confronted the silent damage of war and began rebuilding power not through force, but through accountability. The Treasury audit delivered a result more dangerous than corruption: insolvency. As accounts were reconciled and obligations tallied, the Regency uncovered the true cost of the dance. The crown was burdened by vast debts accumulated through emergency loans, unpaid contracts, and deferred obligations to bankers, merchants, and great houses. Wartime necessity had masked the scale of borrowing. Peace exposed it. Revenues no longer matched promises already made. Interest accrued while the realm struggled to recover. This discovery reshaped every future decision. Tax relief became impossible. New projects were delayed or abandoned. The regents faced a hard truth: authority without solvency was fragile. The debt was recorded, categorized, and confirmed, transforming rumor into fact. From this moment, governance shifted from restoring order to managing scarcity. The war was over, but its shadow endured in ledgers and seals. Westeros would be ruled under constraint, its recovery dictated not by will, but by what the crown could afford. The discovery of crushing war debt left the Regency with few options and little time. Without immediate revenue, the crown risked default, and default threatened authority itself. In response, the Regency Council authorized emergency taxation decrees, invoking wartime powers to extract funds from a realm already exhausted. These measures were framed as temporary, but their scope was unprecedented. Levies were imposed on trade, land yields, port duties, and inheritance transfers. Exemptions that once protected certain houses or cities were suspended. The decrees were drafted swiftly, sealed, and dispatched across Westeros with clear instructions for enforcement. This was not negotiation, it was necessity. The regents understood the danger. Taxation bred resentment, but insolvency bred collapse. By issuing emergency taxes, the council chose survival over popularity. From this moment, peace carried a price paid not in blood, but in coin, and every subject of the realm was made to share the burden of a war already lost. The war's end did not restore the harvest. Fields left untended during years of fighting now yielded little, while emergency taxes stripped villages of stored grain meant to last the winter. As coin was demanded, food vanished. Across Westeros, shortages spread unevenly but relentlessly, striking towns already weakened by loss of labor and livestock. Markets thinned. Prices rose beyond reach. The Regency had secured authority, but it could not command abundance. Reports arrived daily, granaries depleted, shipments delayed, ports unable to supply inland regions. Hunger bred anger faster than rebellion ever had. The council faced a grim reality. Famine ignored would become unrest, and unrest would demand force. Yet the treasury, already burdened by debt, could not easily intervene. The food crisis was not born of a single failure, but of accumulated neglect, war, and necessity. Peace had returned, but survival had not. For many across the realm, the dance's true cost was only now being paid, meal by meal. As shortages deepened and emergency taxes failed to secure sufficient food, the Regency turned to coercion. Royal authority was invoked to requisition grain directly from producers and regional stores, overriding local control. These orders did not distinguish between surplus and survival. Villages were compelled to surrender fixed portions of their harvests, while granaries held by towns, septs, and private merchants were opened by decree. The regents framed the policy as temporary and necessary, intended to stabilize urban centers and prevent famine-driven unrest. In practice, requisition shifted hunger rather than eliminating it. Rural regions bore the immediate cost. losing reserves meant for winter. Officials were instructed to record seizures meticulously, promising compensation at a later date, payment that few believed would come. Forced requisition marked a turning point. Governance moved beyond taxation into direct extraction. The crown no longer asked for food, it claimed it. Peace endured, but consent eroded quietly with every emptied granary. The Riverlands broke first. Long scarred by the dance, the region had endured burned fields, lost labor, and repeated requisitions that stripped villages of their last reserves. When royal agents arrived to seize grain that no longer existed, obedience collapsed. Peasant uprisings erupted across river towns and crossroads, uncoordinated, desperate, and fueled by hunger rather than ambition. Storehouses were blocked, carts overturned, and officials driven out by sheer numbers. These were not rebellions seeking crowns or banners, they were refusals to starve quietly. News traveled fast along the rivers, carrying defiance from hamlet to market town. The Regency recognized the danger immediately. Unchecked unrest in the Riverlands threatened trade routes, tax collection, and the fragile authority rebuilt since the war. What had begun as economic strain now became open disorder. The realm faced a hard truth. Policies meant to save the cities had ignited the countryside. Hunger had found its voice, and it spoke in crowds. The Regency answered unrest with force. Reports from the Riverlands made clear that requisition orders alone would no longer be obeyed. Roads were blocked, officials expelled, and supply routes threatened. To restore authority, the Regency Council authorized the deployment of royal troops into the region. These forces were not sent to conquer, but to contain. Their orders were explicit: reopen roads, secure granaries designated for the crown, and disperse unlawful gatherings. The regents sought speed over spectacle, understanding that hesitation would embolden resistance elsewhere. Columns advanced along rivers and crossroads, banners raised not for glory, but for recognition. The presence of armed men shifted the balance immediately. Villages that had resisted grain seizures now faced the reality of state power. Violence was restrained but decisive. The uprisings did not end through negotiation alone. They were quieted by the certainty that refusal would be met with force. Peace was preserved, but only under guard. With the uprisings contained and villages subdued, the Regency moved to conclude the crisis through example. Identified leaders of the Riverlands disturbances, men accused of organizing resistance, blocking royal roads, and attacking officials, were condemned by decree. Their executions were made public, not to satisfy justice alone, but to warn. Scaffolds were raised in market towns and at crossroads where unrest had been strongest. The process was deliberate and visible, carried out under strict control. No speeches promised mercy, and no crowds were invited to celebrate. Silence was enforced. By executing leaders rather than masses, the Regency sought to sever rebellion at its head while sparing the body. The message was unmistakable. Hardship might be endured, but defiance would not. These deaths marked the final phase of suppression. Order returned not because hunger had eased, but because resistance now carried a known and final cost. With open revolt crushed, the Regency addressed a quieter but critical vulnerability: castles whose loyalty had lapsed during the war and unrest. Across the Riverlands and neighboring regions, key fortresses sat under weakened or compromised control, some held by pardoned houses, others by caretakers installed during chaos. The Regency Council moved to reclaim these positions in the Crown's name. Royal commissioners arrived with writs authorizing inspection, replacement of garrisons, and the transfer of keys and records. Where resistance was absent, the process was administrative and swift. Where hesitation lingered, the presence of royal troops ensured compliance without battle. Strategic castles guarded roads, rivers, and storehouses. Leaving them unsecured invited renewed disorder. By reclaiming these strongholds, the Regency reasserted territorial control not through conquest, but through lawful possession. Authority returned to stone and gatehouse. The realm's defenses were reordered to answer the crown alone, quietly, permanently, and with an eye toward preventing the next crisis before it began. With castles secured and unrest contained, the Regency moved to formalize obedience across the realm. Lords whose loyalty had wavered or whose silence had endured too long were summoned to King's Landing to renew their oaths to the crown. This was not a celebration of unity, but an accounting. Attendance was compulsory, terms non-negotiable. Each lord was required to kneel, swear anew, and accept the Regency's authority without condition. Past allegiances were not debated, they were overwritten. The ceremony served multiple purposes. It reaffirmed hierarchy, identified descent, and reminded the nobility that legitimacy now flowed through the council as much as the throne. Those who complied retained lands and titles. Those who delayed were noted. Those who refused were marked. By compelling oaths in public and record, the Regency transformed loyalty from sentiment into contract. The realm's rulers bent the knee again, not to glory, but to continuity enforced by law. Not all answered the summons. A small number of lords refused to renew their oaths, some in silence, others through open defiance. The Regency treated this not as dissent, but as a test. Authority that tolerated refusal would invite imitation. The response was swift and deliberate. Royal writs were issued declaring the recalcitrant houses in breach of the king's peace. Troops were dispatched with narrow mandates: seize castles, arrest named individuals, and enforce compliance without prolonging conflict. In most cases, resistance collapsed before battle was necessary. Gates opened, keys were surrendered. Where force was applied, it was contained and overwhelming, designed to end defiance in days rather than ignite new wars. Punishment followed law. Lands held in abeyance, heirs taken as wards, commanders removed. The message traveled faster than the armies. Loyalty was no longer negotiable. The Regency ruled by rule, but it enforced by strength. Refusal ended here. Though the dragons were gone, the Dragonpit remained a symbol too dangerous to neglect. Once the heart of Targaryen power, it now stood as a ruin of memory, its great dome scarred, its purpose ended. The Regency understood that symbols could still provoke fear, hope, or rebellion. To prevent rumor and misuse, the Dragonpit was placed under permanent guard by royal order. Access was restricted, patrols established, and the surrounding approaches secured. This was not defense against an enemy, but against meaning itself. No gatherings were permitted, no relics removed. The regents intended the Dragonpit to be watched, not remembered. By guarding an empty monument, they signaled a final break with the Age of Dragons. Power would no longer descend from the sky. It would stand on stone, law, and force. The Dragonpit became a controlled ruin, contained, silent, and stripped of its former authority. After securing the Dragonpit, the Regency confronted a question that lingered like smoke after fire: whether any dragons yet lived. Rumors persisted of shadows in distant skies, of eggs hidden, or beasts wounded but not dead. To end speculation, the Regency Council ordered a formal census of surviving dragons. Royal envoys, keepers, and scholars were dispatched to known lairs, former hatcheries, and the Dragonpit ruins. Their mandate was precise: confirm existence, condition, and location, nothing more. The findings were grim. Most dragons were confirmed dead. A few remnants remained, injured, stunted, or incapable of flight. Eggs were catalogued, guarded, and sealed. No attempt was made to revive what had been lost. This census was not hope, it was closure. By recording the end of dragonkind in ink and seal, the Regency fixed the truth beyond rumor. Power would no longer depend on living fire. The age after dragons required certainty, not legend. Despite the census confirming the near extinction of dragons, hope, or desperation, lingered within the Regency. Dragon eggs had been catalogued, sealed, and guarded, but some among the court believed the line might yet be restored. Under controlled conditions and royal authorization, limited attempts were made to hatch the remaining eggs. These efforts were cautious, secretive, and stripped of spectacle. Fires were maintained, rituals abandoned, and caretakers instructed to rely on heat and time alone. Nothing came. The eggs remained cold, their shells unbroken, their promise inert. Weeks passed, then months without change. The failures were recorded without commentary. No punishments followed, only silence. The Regency drew its conclusion carefully. The Age of Dragons could not be forced back into being. What war had destroyed, patience could not revive. With each failed attempt, certainty replaced hope. Dragons were no longer merely absent, they were finished. The crown would rule without them, bound to the limits of men and law alone. The final confirmation came quietly. The last young dragons, already weakened by war, confinement, and failed care, did not survive the years that followed. One by one, they withered, their growth stunted, their strength insufficient for flight or flame. No battles marked their passing, no crowds gathered. Their deaths were recorded as facts, not events. Keepers reported declining movement, reduced heat, and finally stillness. The Regency ordered documentation, inspection, and sealing of remains. What could not be saved would not be displayed. These deaths ended debate more decisively than any decree. Dragons were no longer a fading possibility, they were a closed chapter. The crown accepted the truth with restraint. Without dragons, rule depended entirely on human institutions: armies, law, coin, and compliance. The age of living fire ended not in spectacle, but in silence. From this moment, the Targaryen monarchy stood alone, stripped of its ancient advantage, ruling a realm that would never again fear the shadow of wings. With the last young dragons confirmed dead and all hatching attempts failed, the Regency confronted a reality that could no longer be delayed. Dragon warfare, once the foundation of Targaryen dominance, was formally abandoned by royal decree. This decision was not symbolic, it was administrative and final. All doctrines, provisions, and offices related to dragon deployment were dissolved. Records were sealed, training halted, and remaining facilities repurposed or closed. The council understood the risk of ambiguity. As long as dragon warfare remained theoretically possible, rivals might wait, plot, or fear its return. By renouncing it openly, the Regency forced the realm to adapt. Future wars would be fought with men, coin, and logistics, not fire from the sky. This marked a fundamental transformation of royal power. The Iron Throne no longer ruled through terror inherited from conquest, but through systems that could be maintained, repaired, and enforced. The Dragon Age ended not with defiance, but with policy. The formal abandonment of dragon warfare forced the crown to confront a reality it had long avoided. Without dragons, the old assumptions of war no longer applied. The Regency ordered a complete rewrite of royal military doctrine, stripping centuries of strategy built around aerial dominance. New texts emphasized infantry discipline, supply chains, fortifications, and coordinated regional levies. Castles were reassessed, not as dragon targets, but as logistical anchors. Roads, rivers, and granaries became strategic assets equal to armies. Command structures were standardized to prevent rival loyalties, and contingencies rewritten for wars that would now last longer and cost more. This transformation was slow and deliberate, driven by necessity rather than innovation. The regions understood that clinging to outdated doctrine would invite disaster. By rewriting how the realm prepared for war, they ensured survival in a dragonless age. Power would no longer descend from the sky, it would advance on foot, measured in men, coin, and endurance. With dragons gone and military doctrine rewritten, the Regency turned to an older instrument of stability: dynastic marriage. The young king's union was not treated as a personal matter, but as policy. Regents debated bloodlines, claims, and optics, seeking a match that would quiet lingering divisions from the Civil War. The decision was deliberate and constrained. The marriage was arranged to bind rival factions, extinguish contested loyalties, and present continuity to a weary realm. Ceremony was kept restrained. The purpose was legitimacy, not celebration. Contracts were drafted, dowries fixed, and oaths renewed around the union. The king's consent was assumed, not sought. This was governance by necessity. Through marriage, the Regency aimed to anchor the crown within a narrowed field of acceptable claims, reducing the risk of future succession disputes. It was a quiet consolidation of power, achieved not with force or coin, but with lineage and law. The effects of the arranged marriage were not immediate, but they were unmistakable. Where the court had once been fractured by suspicion and lingering factional memory, alignment began to replace tension. Rival claimants withdrew quietly. Counselors who had spoken cautiously now spoke less, and those who had plotted found fewer listeners. The marriage did not erase the scars of war, but it narrowed the field of conflict. With succession clarified and bloodlines bound, uncertainty lost its leverage. The regents observed the shift carefully. Stability at court meant fewer crises beyond it. Petitions slowed. Challenges softened into negotiations. The crown's authority, long enforced through decrees and force, gained a measure of acceptance it had lacked since the war's end. This was not harmony born of affection, but order produced by inevitability. By stabilizing the court through marriage, the Regency achieved something armies could not: a pause in ambition. For the first time since the dance, the center of power held without strain. Stability did not erase danger, it merely concealed it. As the court settled into routine, fragments of information began to surface: discrepancies in correspondence, unusual movements within the Red Keep, and whispers traced through servants rather than lords. The Regency ordered a quiet inquiry. What emerged was an assassination plot aimed not at spectacle, but at leverage. The target was chosen for access, the method for deniability. No banners were involved, no rival house named openly. The plan relied on proximity and patience, exploiting the very calm the marriage alliance had created. Once confirmed, the response was swift and contained. Suspects were isolated, communications seized, and the plot dismantled before it could advance beyond preparation. No announcement was made. The regents understood that public panic would damage the order they had just secured. The court returned to silence, but not innocence. The episode proved a hard truth. Peace had narrowed ambition, not eliminated it. Power, even stabilized, remained worth killing for. Once the assassination plot was confirmed, the Regency acted without delay or display. Arrest orders were issued quietly, timed to prevent warning or resistance. Conspirators were taken individually, removed from chambers, kitchens, and service corridors before word could spread. No public accusations were made. Silence was preserved as carefully as authority. Interrogations followed under controlled conditions, conducted by officials empowered to extract truth rather than confessions for spectacle. Questions focused on scope, funding, and intent. Names were verified, correspondence traced, and links tested for wider reach. Some suspects broke quickly, others maintained silence. The Regency recorded everything. What mattered was not vengeance, but containment. The council sought assurance that the plot had been isolated and extinguished. By arresting and interrogating conspirators decisively, the Regency reinforced an unspoken rule of court life. Intrigue would be answered not with chaos, but with method. The court continued its routines, unaware or pretending to be, while danger was removed, piece by piece. The Regency chose finality over spectacle. Once interrogations confirmed guilt and the scope of the plot, sentences were issued without delay. The executions were carried out under strict control, away from public ceremony but not from consequence. The aim was deterrence, not drama. By acting decisively, the council sought to sever intrigue at its root and prevent imitation within the court. Procedures were standardized, witnesses limited, and records sealed. No speeches justified the sentences, no appeals prolonged them. The Regency understood that uncertainty was more dangerous than severity. These deaths closed the episode with clarity. Court life resumed its routines the same day, but the message lingered. Access to power carried absolute risk. The executions did not announce a return to terror, they reaffirmed boundaries. In a court stabilized by marriage and order, conspiracy had found its limit. Authority would be preserved by law and enforced when necessary. The Regency had ruled through balance, but balance itself became a liability. As authority consolidated, one regent accumulated influence beyond what the council could tolerate, commanding appointments, shaping decrees, and controlling access to information. The arrangement that once prevented tyranny now risked enabling it. The response was internal and calculated. Evidence was gathered quietly, correspondence reviewed, decisions audited, alliances mapped. When the move came, it was procedural rather than theatrical. The regent was summoned, confronted with findings, and stripped of authority by collective vote. No trial followed, no public accusation announced. Removal was framed as necessity, not punishment. Offices were reassigned, retainers dismissed, and records sealed to prevent retaliation. The council acted to preserve itself and the crown it served. This episode revealed the Regency's final truth. Power was tolerated only while it remained shared. Even those entrusted to rule could be unruled. Stability endured, but only because ambition was cut away before it could harden into challenge. The removal of a dominant regent exposed a structural weakness the council could no longer ignore. The Regency had been designed to prevent tyranny through shared rule, yet imbalance had still emerged. In response, the council undertook formal restructuring. Membership was adjusted, duties redistributed, and limits codified where custom had once sufficed. No regent would again control appointments, finances, or security alone. Voting procedures were clarified. Oversight committees were established to audit decisions internally. Access to the king was regulated through rotation rather than influence. This was not reform driven by idealism, but by survival. The regents understood that authority fractured too loosely invited chaos, while authority concentrated invited challenge. The restructuring sought equilibrium, rule strong enough to govern, constrained enough to endure. When completed, the regency functioned less as a gathering of powerful individuals and more as an institution. The crown remained a child's, but governance matured. Power was no longer trusted to balance itself, it was engineered to do so. With doctrine rewritten and dragons removed from every plan, the regency moved from theory to enforcement. Military reform was enacted across the realm, reshaping how the crown raised, supplied, and commanded its forces. Emergency wartime levies were replaced with regulated musters. Command ranks were standardized to prevent personal armies from reforming under powerful lords. Training emphasized cohesion over heroism, discipline over lineage. Garrisons were resized and repositioned, focusing on roads, ports, and granaries rather than symbolic strongholds. Funding was reduced but stabilized, tying military readiness to the strained realities of the treasury. These reforms were neither popular nor swift. Lords resisted limits on their authority, veterans resented change. Yet the regency persisted. The goal was not conquest, but reliability. For the first time since the conquest, the Iron Throne prepared to defend itself without fear or fire. The army that emerged was smaller, slower, and bound by law, but it belonged to the state, not to ambition. The culmination of reform arrived with a decision that reshaped royal power for generations. The regency authorized the creation of a permanent standing royal army, a force maintained by the crown in peacetime, independent of feudal summons. This was a break from tradition. No longer would the Iron Throne rely solely on temporary levies raised by lords whose loyalty could shift. Recruitment was centralized, pay standardized, and service terms defined by royal law. Units were stationed strategically near roads, ports, and grain routes, not at the pleasure of local rulers. The army was modest in size, but continuous in presence. Its purpose was deterrence as much as defense. By establishing a standing force, the regency claimed a monopoly on organized violence that dragons once provided. Authority no longer waited for war to assemble itself, it stood ready every day. The crown had learned from chaos and ensured it would never again be powerless at peace. The end of war and famine left behind men who would not return to peace. Disbanded soldiers, failed rebels, and deserters coalesced into bandit armies that preyed on roads, villages, and trade routes. These groups were not scattered thieves, but organized remnants of conflict, armed and mobile, exploiting the realm's exhaustion. With the standing royal army now established, the regency moved to eliminate them systematically. Patrols were reinforced, intelligence gathered from local officials, and operations planned to isolate and encircle bandit concentrations. There were no negotiations. The objective was eradication. Columns advanced through forests and along rivers, cutting off escape and dismantling camps one by one. Survivors were arrested, weapons seized, leaders removed. The campaign was deliberate and unpublicized, aimed at restoring safety rather than claiming victory. By destroying the bandit armies, the regency closed the final chapter of post-war violence. The roads reopened, trade resumed, and the realm took another step away from chaos toward governed peace. With bandit armies eliminated and roads secured, the regency turned to restoring movement across the realm. Trade had collapsed not from lack of goods alone, but from fear. Merchants avoided highways, caravans dissolved, and ports functioned below capacity. To reverse this, the regency authorized the reopening of major trade routes under armed escort. Standing royal troops were assigned to protect caravans, patrol river crossings, and secure market towns along key corridors. This was not temporary charity, but strategic investment. Trade restored tax revenue, stabilized food distribution, and reduced unrest more effectively than decrees ever could. Escorts were visible but restrained, signaling protection rather than occupation. Gradually, wagons returned to the roads and sails to the rivers. Commerce resumed under watchful steel. By guarding trade, the crown demonstrated a new kind of power, one that enabled movement instead of suppressing it. Peace became profitable again, and the realm began to breathe. Trade could not truly recover while the ports remained divided. During the war and its aftermath, several major harbors had slipped from effective royal control, dominated by local powers, merchant cartels, or militias who enforced their own rules. Recognizing this weakness, the Regency moved decisively to restore direct crown authority over the realm's ports. Royal officials were installed, harbor masters replaced, and customs offices brought under centralized oversight. Standing troops secured docks, warehouses, and river mouths, ensuring that tariffs were collected and laws applied uniformly. This was less about punishment than predictability. Merchants required consistent rules to risk capital again. By reclaiming the ports, the Regency reasserted control over the flow of goods, coin, and information entering Westeros. Ships sailed under known authority once more. The sea lanes reopened not through trust, but through order. With ports secured, the crown regained its grip on the realm's economic arteries. Even as trade resumed and ports returned to royal control, resistance had not vanished entirely. In remote valleys, borderlands, and regions slow to recover from famine and war, isolated rebellions continued to surface. These were not organized civil wars, but local refusals, lords withholding taxes, villages resisting levies, armed groups rejecting royal authority out of habit rather than ideology. The Regency treated these final disturbances with precision. Intelligence was gathered, forces deployed selectively, and objectives kept narrow. There would be no drawn-out campaigns. Royal troops moved quickly to isolate leaders, seize strongpoints, and dismantle resistance before it could spread. In many cases, the mere arrival of crown forces ended defiance without battle. Where violence occurred, it was decisive and brief. By suppressing the last regional rebellions, the Regency closed the long aftermath of the dance. Authority no longer contested itself in fragments. The realm was not healed, but it was whole again. With rebellion extinguished and authority restored, the Regency moved to prevent its return. A realm-wide disarmament decree was issued, targeting the greatest residual threat to peace: uncontrolled weapons in civilian hands. Years of war had flooded Westeros with swords, spears, and armor held far beyond any lawful muster. The decree ordered all non-royal forces to surrender arms to designated collection points. Only licensed household guards, city watches, and the standing royal army were permitted to retain weapons. Compliance was mandatory, deadlines fixed, penalties clear. This was not symbolic pacification, it was structural prevention. By stripping the countryside of arms, the Regency sought to ensure that unrest could not quickly reassemble into violence. Enforcement was systematic rather than theatrical. Weapons were counted, stored, and recorded, not destroyed in spectacle. The decree marked a turning point. Peace would be maintained not by constant patrols, but by reducing the means of revolt itself. The realm entered a quieter phase, less volatile, more governed, and finally restrained by law rather than fear. With rebellion suppressed and trade secured, the Regency acted to ensure that order would not depend on constant campaigns. The solution was permanence. Royal authority was anchored through the establishment of permanent garrisons at strategic locations across the realm, road junctions, river crossings, ports, and previously unstable regions. These were not temporary encampments, but fixed installations with defined command, regular pay, and clear jurisdiction. Garrisons answered directly to the crown, not to local lords, breaking the cycle of private force that had fueled earlier unrest. Their presence was meant to deter, not provoke. Soldiers were instructed to patrol, report, and remain visible, without interference in civilian life. Over time, the sight of helmets at gates and watchfires on walls became routine. Violence receded not because fear returned, but because opportunity vanished. By fixing force in place, the Regency replaced reaction with prevention. The realm entered a phase where peace was guarded by structure, not improvisation. With force stabilized and emergency powers receding, the Regency turned to the final pillar of lasting order: justice. During the war and its aftermath, law had fragmented. Local courts improvised, lords judged their own causes, and royal writs went unanswered beyond the capital. The Regency moved to reverse this collapse by enforcing royal justice across the realm. Circuit judges were appointed and dispatched, mandates standardized, and appeals redirected to crown authority. Sentences were reviewed, unlawful seizures corrected, and delayed cases reopened under uniform procedure. This was not mercy, nor was it vengeance, it was consistency. By restoring predictable law, the Regency sought to replace fear with expectation. Disputes would no longer be settled by arms or influence, but by record and ruling. The work was slow, contested, and deeply political, but it held. As royal justice reached towns and lordships alike, authority ceased to feel provisional. The crown no longer reacted to disorder, it adjudicated it. With order restored, law enforced, and emergency powers lifted, the Regency faced its final task: ending itself. The council had been created to govern in the king's absence, not to replace him. As stability returned and institutions held without constant intervention, continued regency became a liability rather than a safeguard. A formal motion was introduced, debated, and passed within the council itself. Authority was returned to the crown in stages, offices dissolved, and extraordinary powers revoked. Regents surrendered seals, dismissed their staffs, and vacated chambers they had occupied for years. There was no public celebration. The dismissal was announced plainly, recorded carefully, and implemented immediately. By stepping aside, the regents affirmed the legitimacy of the monarchy they had preserved. This was not abdication under pressure, but withdrawal by design. The Regency ended not in failure, but in completion. The realm no longer required guardians. Governance returned to the king, intact, centralized, and no longer provisional. The transfer of power did not come with spectacle. After years of regency, decrees, and collective rule, authority returned to its source with deliberate restraint. Aegon III formally assumed full royal authority through a sealed proclamation that ended all intermediary governance. The act was legal, procedural, and unmistakable. Oaths were renewed directly to the king. Officials who had once answered to regents now answered to the crown alone. Councils continued to meet, but as advisors, not rulers. The young king did not announce a new era with grand reforms or threats. His authority was established through continuity. What the Regency had built, armies, courts, and administration, now stood under a single will. The significance lay not in action, but in presence. For the first time since the war, the realm was ruled by its king in fact, not in name. The long transition ended quietly, power settled, centralized, and complete. With full authority now vested in the crown, Aegon III moved to confront the legal remnants of war. Over years of crisis, the realm had accumulated emergency statutes, broad arrest powers, property seizures, forced levies, and suspended rights. Measures justified by survival, but corrosive in peace. The king ordered a comprehensive review of all wartime laws still in force. Clerks compiled decrees, judges annotated conflicts, and advisors assessed which measures protected order and which merely preserved fear. The process was deliberate. Laws were not swept away wholesale. They were examined one by one. Those tied exclusively to war were repealed. Others were narrowed, time-limited, or absorbed into standard law. Announcements were issued region by region to prevent confusion. This act signaled a decisive shift in kingship. Aegon III did not rule by exception, he ruled by statute. By dismantling the legal architecture of emergency, the crown affirmed that the war was not merely over in fact, but over in law. Even after law was restored and wartime statutes repealed, a small number of unresolved sentences remained, cases too bound to the dance of the dragons to be ignored. These were not new crimes nor acts of convenience. They were judgments delayed by instability, politics, and the long shadow of civil war. Under Aegon III's restored authority, the crown ordered a final review. Guilt had already been established, appeals exhausted. What remained was enforcement. The executions were limited, precise, and explicitly framed as closure. They were carried out under royal justice, not regency decree, marking the last legal consequences of the conflict. No public spectacle accompanied them. Witnesses were restricted, records finalized, and families notified according to law. With these sentences fulfilled, the dance ceased to exist as a living legal matter. It passed fully into history. The realm moved forward not by forgetting the war, but by finishing it, completely and without ambiguity. With executions concluded and wartime law dismantled, the crown turned to the political wounds that could not be healed by justice alone. Major houses that had survived the dance, on both sides of the conflict, remained wary, bound by memory, loss, and unresolved grievance. Aegon III's court initiated a formal process of reconciliation, not through apology, but through recognition. Delegations were summoned to King's Landing under royal guarantee of safety. Claims were acknowledged, pardons confirmed where already granted, and obligations restated without threat. The process was ceremonial, deliberate, and controlled. No single house was elevated above the others. The message was uniform. The war was over, and the crown would treat former enemies as subjects, not suspects. These reconciliations did not erase resentment, but they ended isolation. By restoring formal relations with the great houses, the monarchy closed the political fractures of the dance. The realm did not forget, but it agreed to continue together under one rule. Reconciliation did not end the need for control. With wounds still fresh and loyalties newly affirmed, the crown declared a period of enforced peace across the 7 kingdoms. This was not a celebration of harmony, but a mechanism to preserve it. Royal authority was applied evenly and without exception. Armed patrols maintained roads and towns, courts operated on fixed schedules, and violations of order were answered swiftly under restored law. The intent was clarity: no private wars, no retaliations, no settling of old scores. Disputes were to be carried to judges, not swords. Lords were reminded that banners could not be raised without leave. Cities that resisted oversight faced immediate correction. Enforced peace was restraint made visible. It created space for recovery by denying conflict the chance to reappear. Over time, quiet became routine. The realm did not yet trust peace, but it learned to live within it, protected by structure rather than hope. Enforced peace could not last on patrols alone. With violence suppressed and authority restored, the crown shifted from visible control to durable prevention. Aegon III authorized a framework of long-term internal security measures designed to endure without constant military presence. Reporting networks were formalized between towns, garrisons, and courts. City watches were standardized in size, pay, and oversight, ending reliance on private enforcers. Travel permits, arms regulations, and inspection routines were unified across regions to prevent gaps in enforcement. Intelligence was no longer improvised, it was institutionalized through clerks, messengers, and scheduled audits. These measures were intentionally unremarkable. Their strength lay in repetition and predictability. By embedding security into administration rather than spectacle, the crown ensured that peace would persist even when soldiers withdrew from view. Order ceased to be an emergency response. It became background structure. The realm entered a phase where stability was maintained not by fear of force, but by systems that quietly denied disorder the space to return. Even after peace was enforced, scattered outlaw groups lingered in forests, hills, and borderlands, small, mobile, and opportunistic. These remnants were not rebels with banners, but survivors of chaos exploiting gaps in order. The crown authorized targeted operations to remove them completely. Intelligence from towns and garrisons guided compact patrols, avoiding large marches that could warn their targets. Camps were located, routes cut off, and leaders captured. Resistance, when it appeared, was brief. Weapons were seized, stolen goods returned, and hideouts dismantled. There were no proclamations and no celebrations. The goal was quiet finality. By eliminating the last outlaw bans, the crown ensured that violence could not regenerate on the margins. Security ceased to chase threats, it prevented them. The realm moved closer to a peace that no longer required constant correction. Even after peace was enforced, scattered outlaw groups lingered in forests, hills, and borderlands, small, mobile, and opportunistic. These remnants were not rebels with banners, but survivors of chaos exploiting gaps in order. The crown authorized targeted operations to remove them completely. Intelligence from towns and garrisons guided compact patrols, avoiding large marches that could warn their targets. Camps were located, routes cut off, and leaders captured. Resistance, when it appeared, was brief. Weapons were seized, stolen goods returned, and hideouts dismantled. There were no proclamations and no celebrations. The goal was quiet finality. By eliminating the last outlaw bans, the crown ensured that violence could not regenerate on the margins. Security ceased to chase threats, it prevented them. The realm moved closer to a peace that no longer required constant correction. The final measure of recovery was not declared, it was observed. After demobilization, no new musters were raised, no levies requested, and no reports of armed conflict reached the crown. Patrols filed routine notices instead of alarms. Garrisons reported months without incident. Roads remained open, borders quiet, and courts unburdened by martial cases. For the first time since the dance, the realm experienced a sustained absence of military engagement. This silence was not accidental. It was the product of exhaustion, reform, and deliberate restraint. The crown did not claim victory, it acknowledged conclusion. With conflicts fully ceased, war lost its immediacy and became memory. Governance proceeded without contingency. The Iron Throne no longer ruled in anticipation of violence, it ruled in its absence. Stability did not arrive as a single decree. It settled gradually, confirmed by repetition. With war ended, forces reduced, and law restored, the Seven Kingdoms entered a sustained phase of balance. Harvests moved without escort, courts resolved disputes on schedule, and lords governed within clear limits set by the crown. Reports from garrisons shifted from security concerns to maintenance requests. Trade revenues stabilized, taxation normalized, and emergency measures faded from memory. Most telling was the absence of reaction. No sudden musters, no rival alliances, no rumors demanding response. Governance functioned as expected, not as crisis management. This was stabilization in practice, not proclamation. The realm remained scarred by war, but it no longer wavered. Authority held because it was predictable. For the first time since the dance, the Seven Kingdoms endured without strain. In the later years of his reign, Aegon III governed without urgency and without illusion. The wars were finished, the regency gone, and the realm stable enough to endure caution. The king ruled through routine rather than initiative, favoring continuity over ambition. Councils met regularly, laws were enforced as written, and precedent guided decision more than impulse. Aegon III involved himself selectively, approving measures that preserved balance and rejecting those that risked disruption. He neither expanded royal power nor relinquished it. His reign was defined by restraint, shaped by memory. Of dragons lost, family destroyed, and chaos survived. Governance became quiet by design. The crown did not seek glory, it sought durability. Under Aegon III, the Seven Kingdoms were not driven forward, they were held together. As the reign entered its final years, the crown turned its attention to continuity. Aegon III authorized formal preparations for succession, not in haste, but with method. Records were reviewed, lines of inheritance clarified, and education plans finalized for the next ruler. Advisors assessed the state of the realm to ensure transition without disruption. Key offices were instructed to document procedures rather than rely on personal authority. Lords were quietly reminded of their obligations under established law. There were no public declarations of urgency, only steady alignment. Succession was treated as administration, not drama. By preparing in advance, the crown sought to prevent the uncertainty that had once shattered the realm. The future would not be improvised, it would proceed by design. The reign ended without upheaval. In the 36th year after the dance, King Aegon III died quietly, his passing marked by procedure rather than shock. There was no sudden crisis, no scramble for authority. Succession plans had been prepared, offices informed, and the court instructed on protocol. Bells were rung, messengers dispatched, and the king's death recorded formally in the annals of the realm. Mourning was restrained, shaped by memory rather than spectacle. Aegon III left no legacy of conquest or reform, but one of endurance. He had ruled through restraint, carrying the weight of a broken dynasty without reopening its wounds. With his death, the last direct shadow of the dance passed from living rule into history. In retrospect, Aegon III's reign defied expectation. He was not remembered for conquest, expansion, or spectacle, but for endurance. Coming to power in the aftermath of civil war and dragon extinction, he ruled a realm exhausted and mistrustful of ambition. His governance prioritized stability over vision, repair over innovation. Institutions rebuilt under regency were preserved rather than reshaped, allowing order to harden into habit. Critics later judged his rule as quiet or colorless. Supporters argued it was precisely this restraint that spared the Seven Kingdoms further ruin. History ultimately measured Aegon III not by what he attempted, but by what he prevented. Under his rule, the realm survived its most fragile generation. and held. The transition of power proceeded without disruption. Following established succession protocols, Daeron I Targaryen was proclaimed king immediately after Aegon III's death. Oaths were renewed, seals transferred, and proclamations dispatched across the realm. The process reflected the stability achieved under the previous reign. No rival claims, no armed demonstrations, no hesitation from the great houses. Daeron ascended not in crisis, but in order. His accession marked a generational shift. Where Aegon III ruled to preserve, Daeron I inherited a realm capable of movement. The crown now passed to a king unburdened by regency or civil war. The era shaped by the dance formally ended. A new reign began, poised to test whether stability would remain restraint or become ambition. The story does not end here. The history of Westeros continues in the chapters yet to be uncovered.